My little itty-bitty bruiser buddies.
United States heavyweight champion from Brazil.
The world's heavyweight champion from the AWA, Nick Bockwinkel.
The Midwest supporting, bruiser loving, positivity spreading, world's most dangerous podcast. Join former pro wrestler and promoter Dave Dynasty as he supports and promotes Midwest pro wrestling. Keep on growing with the Midwest Express. This is the Dave Dynasty Show.
And welcome to the Dave Dynasty Show. I am your host, Dave Dynasty, and I am joined this week with another guest co-host. I am joined by author and wrestling historian John Cosper. John, how are you doing?
Doing great, Dave. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you for joining us. I've long been a fan of your work. I know we've communicated some online, and I've always enjoyed your books. Let's talk a little bit about those that maybe aren't familiar with you and your work and your background. You live in the Louisville area, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Are you from that area?
Originally born in Miami. When I was a kid, we kind of moved around a little bit. My dad was an engineer, and depending on what project he was working on, we went different places. So lived in South Carolina for a few years, Miami my elementary school years, and then Texas a couple years before moving here in about, I think, fall of '88.
Okay. So let's talk about that. When are your first memories of wrestling as being a fan and watching it?
Oh, that was elementary school. That was the rock and wrestling era, and it was really probably my fandom with the A-Team and Mr. T that probably got me into it, because seeing Mr. T on Entertainment Tonight with Hulk Hogan and Cyndi Lauper was another one that I liked, and finally convinced my dad. My grandfather was a huge wrestling fan. My dad wasn't. My mom definitely was not. But they finally let us watch an episode of Superstars on a Saturday morning. And the very first guy out is Randy Savage with Pomp and Circumstance and the big flowing sequin robe and Miss Elizabeth. And I was just hooked right away. Yeah. That's the earliest I remember watching.
Yeah. So you were still in Miami or in that area, right? You said in grade school?
Right.
So were you able, I know you said your dad wasn't really a fan, and your mom definitely would. So did you not really get out and see any of the locals? I know it's kind of all dying out by that point.
I didn't get out to see an actual live show until actually after the first class of OVW had even left OVW. And some of that's on me. I knew all going on over there, but I mean nobody knew at the time. When you're looking at the website and Cena and Brock Lesnar, you knew these names had the potential, but you had no idea.
Yeah, right.
Who they were really going to be. So, really, the first time I went, it was Kurt Angle was there to wrestle the Damager, and I don't know if Cody Rhodes was on the show at the time, but I think he was at OVW at that time. And I remember Ron Simmons were there, and this couple in front of us the whole time. Now I'm mixing up my times going. I think it was the second time I went. When Jackie Gaeta came out on the arm of the Damager, and the whole time she's out there, this old couple sitting there, they got the middle fingers extended, just screaming, "Hot tub, ho! Hot tub, ho!"
That's funny. Yeah, I've always been a big fan of the Damager. He's from Seymour, just a few minutes south of me. Yeah. So I remember I saw him kind of even in his really early days and stuff, and then he always, even a little after, kind of worked the area a lot, and I was always a fan of his, and I was glad to see the success he did. So you moved to Louisville. So how long did it take you before you really got the whiff of the history in that city with wrestling, and it really perked your interest? How did that all begin?
It was later. It was, when back then that was kind of the dying throes of the Memphis era. But every afternoon I was watching World Class Championship Wrestling on ESPN back then when I was in junior high and high school. But I was in my 20s, and really what hooked me into the history and everything. A buddy of mine named Randy had moved in with me for about 9 months, brought us entire wrestling library, which was VHS tapes and also books. And that's when I read Have a Nice Day and Foley is Good and Bobby Heenan's book, Jerry Lawler's book, and Kurt Angle's, and kind of got interested in reading more about the history and the stories and everything. What really piqued my interest with writing Louisville books was I kind of became, after I got married and we had a couple kids, and I made my first trip to WrestleMania 27, I believe. I started reading a few more of the books again and kind of discovered Mark James and the stuff he'd done on Memphis. And he covered Memphis really well, but hadn't done anything specific on Louisville. And Cornette hadn't done that either at the time. And I was like, well, you got the Memphis stories, you got the OVW stories. There's a history there to tell. And then started doing some Googling and discovered, the story of Ed Strangler Lewis getting his name in Louisville.
Right.
And one day, it was almost 6 years ago. I was at lunch with my wife at Penn Station. I said, I'm thinking about writing a book about the history of wrestling in Louisville. And she said, go for it. I was like, really? She's like, yeah, you love wrestling. You're a great writer. I've been writing professionally. I've been writing theater and film and fiction and stuff like that for 20-something years, and still have a really good side gig writing actually children's Sunday school curriculum. But at that time I was kind of looking for something new to do. I'd walked away from what I had hoped would turn into a full-time teaching position. Unfortunately, didn't in theater, and it was a door that was kind of there. And I spent a year and a half working on the book and cranked my second book out a couple months after that. I'm 10 books in, almost 5 years later. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah. And it's kind of a fact. I mean, even I've lived my whole life just a little over an hour from Louisville. And to me, I always thought, I guess I kind of perceived from what I've seen that Louisville was just always a Memphis town, that it started with Jarrett. And I mean, I knew there was some before because I knew Dick the Bruiser had worked in that area some, prior. And I know there was kind of that dead period before Jarrett took over. But see, all the stuff before that you've brought out in your books, I mean, I had no idea, and about, the Allen Club and all these different things. And it's so fascinating to me. Let's talk. So what was the first book you did? Was it the Louisville's Greatest Show or?
Bluegrass Brawlers was the first book I did.
Okay, right. Okay.
Yeah. That one covered Louisville all the way 1880 all the way up to the present. So you got circus wrestling stories and some of the Barnstormers, William Muldoon, who was considered the first world champion back in the 1880s, and then of course the Strangler Lewis stories and the Allen Club era, and then all the way up through OVW.
Yeah. Okay. So when in all your research, because you also did a book on Lord Carleton, correct?
Right.
So when did you encounter Lord Carleton and thought, I need to explore this guy a little deeper, a little further? How did that come to?
His daughter is on some of the pro wrestling historical groups and everything, and saw her posting some different things, some pictures and stuff like that. And I kind of sent her a message and said, "Hey, would you ever be interested in doing his story?" And was really still looking to try to build a name for myself and try to get some more, get something else going. And so I kind of hit her up on it. And boy, Lord Carleton's a fascinating story. He's kind of a forgotten figure. Yeah. I mean, he was kind of in a similar vein of Gorgeous George, and everybody remembers Gorgeous George, but. Lord Carleton was the youngest person ever admitted to the art school in San Francisco, and he was a phenomenal athlete. Could have been a boxer, and realized I'm going to have a lot less wear and tear on my body doing pro wrestling the way one's real and one's not. Yeah. And was a phenomenal artist, and his real life story was a complete soap opera. His first wife was murdered by their son, and then his second wife was constantly trying to murder him the whole rest of his life. Honestly, his story outside of the ring is even more dramatic and soap opera-ish than his wrestling life, which is saying something.
Yeah. And it's kind of, it does amaze me that he did have this Gorgeous George-esque about him. He reinvented himself, and I've always wondered with him and George and anybody that is kind of an innovator, pretty much at anything, that what the process and the thinking is when that clicks. That hey, I'm going to try this, and it's always been a fascinating thing to me. And I wish some of those guys, had the chance to more in depth tell what their thinking of it was. Like with Gorgeous George, what inspires a guy to dye his hair blonde and
right
start with the valet and the perfume. It's just so forward thinking.
And really, with both those guys, it was it's working for Wilbur Finran, so I might as well do it. Wilbur Finran was a farm boy from Ohio who reinvented himself as Lord Patrick Lansdowne. He was the first guy to put the monocle and the cape and everything, and to pretend to be from England. And really, Gorgeous George and it's separate from each other. Gorgeous George and Tug Carlson, who became Lord Carleton, they both looked at it and they said, "Well, it's working for him. Why don't I try it?" And they each put their own different spin on it.
Yeah, and You've been working a lot on trying to tell the story, or I'm assuming you are telling the story of Jim Mitchell, the Black Panther. And tell me, I know there's this fascinating story about the estate of Jim Mitchell that you got a big part in. Tell me the story of that and how you got involved with that and the things you're discovering in this estate as you do that.
Yeah, Jim Mitchell, I discovered him when I was working on Bluegrass Brawlers. He was an African-American wrestler from Louisville, Kentucky, became a star internationally. He traveled Australia, he traveled Canada, he traveled to 98% certain that he actually did have a European tour, became a huge star out on the West Coast in the late 40s. But again, they're just one of those guys that kind of became overshadowed, unfortunately, by Bobo Brazil and his story. Mm-hmm. But all the things that Brazil gets credit for, I mean, Mitchell was doing 20 years before Brazil was. He was wrestling against white wrestlers and all. What happened with that was, of course, I've been fascinated by the story, and it was one of those things, along with the Allen Athletic Club, which I wanted to go back and tell that story, and I did. But I wanted to tell his story, and I wanted to write a biography of this guy, and, I was never really certain there was enough to do that, but it was I guess it was about a year and a half ago. I get an email out of the blue from a guy in Toledo, Ohio, that says, "Hey, my buddy bought Jim Mitchell's estate. You need to talk to this guy." So I give his friend a call, and what this guy did, he had bought the house, Jim Mitchell's house, 1020 Lincoln Avenue is where he had lived from the 1950s until the 80s when he was put into a retirement home because he was suffering from dementia and Alzheimer's. But that was his home for almost 40 years. All of his stuff was still in the house when this guy bought the house. He had heard about it. He actually went out to breakfast with his girlfriend one morning, heard these old ladies talking about a house in the old historic district. It was kind of run down, needed some work, and he could get it for a song. What had happened was Mitchell's stepdaughter had just passed away, and she was the one living at the house at the time, which I've only recently discovered that's who he had acquired the house from. But he walked around the house. He made an offer, I think, for $12,000, bought this, old estate. And as he starts going from room to room, he's discovering letters. He's finding wrestling programs. He found 9.5 pairs of wrestling boots that belonged to this guy. Wrestling posters. I've got a couple of them on the wall right here next to me. All kinds of stuff. Personal photos, ledger books from the liquor store that he ran after he retired from wrestling. He was a member of the Masons, and he had his apron. He had pins. He had his 33rd degree certificate. All this kind of stuff, all these things that actually belonged to him. He had papers from his time in the Army when he served during World War II. And so I made the trip up to Toledo, and basically the guy's retired now, and he's like, I don't want this stuff. I hope there's some value in it. I'd like to sell it. So we worked out a deal where I took, basically in 2 loads, I took everything, brought everything down here, scanned well over 900 documents, on my computer. And, we kind of piecemeal sold it on eBay. I took a percentage of it and put most of that right back into buying the stuff from the guy as well. So I've got a nice collection here that I could show off. I've got a couple of his suitcases, and I've got some boots and some photos that I've been taking around, and I got to go and show these to some of the local museum folks here in Louisville a couple months ago, and they went absolutely bonkers. Yeah. None of them current wrestling fans, but they're just like, the history of this is just amazing. They couldn't believe it. So it's been really neat to actually hold and see and touch a lot of that history and kind of do some digging. And unfortunately, there's still some gaps and some questions I'm not sure I'm going to be able to answer before the book actually gets out. Yeah. Particularly related to his family, he really had. It seems like there were no heirs. He had a stepdaughter. There's mention of a son, but I've not been able to track down or find any evidence he actually even had a son, much less what happened to his son. So, but it's a fascinating story. This is a guy who, he had a dream, and he became a pro wrestler at a time when, he really broke a lot of ground, for African American athletes in general, not just in pro wrestling. Yeah. And really excited to get the story out.
Yeah, it's when stuff like that happens, and every few years something happens. There's some, usually it's video or it's tape that that turns up, and and it always makes you wonder, man, what is out there, or what is even what's already been lost, where people did things like that, where people bought an estate or bought a house and just had no idea what they had and just tossed it, and or even cared to even go through it. I mean, it kind of makes you shudder to think
it's so exciting to go and dig these stories. Yeah, he's not the only one I've done deep dives with. Stu Gibson's another guy who's actually from New Albany, which is where I graduated in high school there. Rob Conway went there as well. Right. But he graduated back in the 40s, and I got to interview his sister a couple months ago and see family photos and just some great stories with him. And Elvira Snodgrass is another one. I've tracked down some of her relatives and found some incredible stories about her. Jim Cornette calls me the world's greatest wrestling stalker, but you know what? These are stories that have got to be found and had. Right. And I've been very fortunate, very blessed at the opportunities that have come along, and people they're finding me now, which is fantastic, and I love it every chance I get to find a new story in any one of those folks.
Yeah, and wrestling, I mean, like any form of history, is often in the hands of those that are writing it, and a lot of times there's certain aspects that for whatever reason just get overlooked, and so over years they get lost. And do you feel that sense of wanting to unearth that? I mean, is that what drives you to do that? Is it that sense of there's this story, there's this overlooked, like a Jim Mitchell, this
absolutely
overlooked that you just have to get his story out there for the world to hear?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's the other thing too is you could also say history is written by the victors.
Right.
Look at the victor. Right now it's WWE, and everything is written, in light of WWE being the center of the wrestling universe, right. which it wasn't always, and it's not. I always point to women's wrestling. They want you to, if you look at the WWE network, they're going to tell you, that Fabulous Moolah was the greatest champion ever, and Mae Young was one of the greatest ever. Moolah never sold out a building. Mildred Burke sold out buildings for 20 years. Yep. You got to get your history from an unbiased source, and I love telling the real story, getting the real story out there, and getting people pointed in the right direction, and anytime I run across, someone who's new in women's wrestling in particular, I'm like, go find Pat LaProd's Sisterhood of the Squared Circle. You've got to read that. That's the real story of women's wrestling, and the stories in that book are phenomenal.
Yeah, and they were doing it in a time when it was 100 times more difficult because, not only the opportunities in general in life, just were not there for them as females. They didn't have, even a lot of common rights that, and things. It was, so it's, and like Jim Mitchell, not only, it's not like just anybody trying to succeed in their field. They had every disadvantage working against them. And
absolutely, yeah. And the women were dealing with, unfortunately, had to go through Billy Wolf, and Billy, right. There's never been a more crooked, twisted, evil, manipulating, conniving individual in wrestling than Billy Wolf. Right. And the way he treated those women, the way he treated Mildred Burke, it was shameful. But nevertheless, they became stars. They became huge stars in their own right, and the women's revolution that's going, is going on, at WWE. It's great to see them finally acknowledging it. It's been going on, I know Evolution's, the first women's pay-per-view is happening this coming week, never mind that Shimmer and Shine have had 150 between the two of them so far. But back then it was completely different, and especially, World War II when the men were overseas, Mildred Burke was one of your big stars. Bill Longson was one of your big stars. Mildred Burke, Mae Young, that would pack your building out, know.
Yep. And they were headlining shows and they were main eventing shows and at that time and that's overlooked. Not to take anything away from the current things being achieved, but it is like you said with WWE pretty much controlling the business. They can put their spin on it. And of course they have footage of Moolah and they have lots of footage of Bobo in
it helps when you have footage to put those people out there. And television changed. And, I was talking to Chris Parsons, he's the great Indianapolis historian about the whole Bobo Brazil thing. And why did he get credit for breaking the color barrier? And he says, it's really it was the promoters at the time and the fact that they had television, there wasn't that much footage of Jim Mitchell wrestling. There's a few video clips, but
Bobo was working.
There's a ton of footage of Bobo Brazil.
Yeah, Bo was working Chicago and Detroit and Indianapolis. There was the Dumont Network, and there was all these other things after that. And
he had so much charisma too. You can't take that away.
Oh, you're right. You're right. No.
Yeah.
But there is something. There's something to be said. Right place, right time.
Exactly.
In so many ways. So, what do you think when you do this studying and this writing and you unearth this stuff? What does that do for your perception of modern day wrestling? Do you find that it enhances at all your enjoyment, or does it make you more? You look at it, and it makes you a little more cynical.
I have a growing appreciation for the sport in general. You can't compare what today is to what that is. Sure. And I enjoy, I'd say the most miserable thing in the world is to sit next to certain, and I'm not going to name names, but certain old school people, whatever, from the business. and watch a modern wrestling show because they can't enjoy any of it. But I love it. I enjoy it. I went to All In. I've been to a bunch of indie shows lately. I was at OVW 1000 last week. There's some phenomenal talent out there. It's a completely different animal than it was then, you know?
Yeah.
And it's just the evolution. It's the continuing growth. It's the continuing change. We're in the midst of, I'm hoping, you know, and I think, you know, where certain people get signed in the next couple months will very much dictate this, I think. But we're certainly in the middle of what could be a very big swing in, you know, how the business is perceived, and you know, the opportunities certainly are growing for people outside of WWE to make a whole lot of money, you know, and to be very successful. So, and you're seeing, you know, even on the lower indie level, there are people who are really learning to be very creative, and put out some really unique stuff, and to thrive and survive, and to be able to do what they love full time. So, it's an exciting time to be right now. And I think it enhances my enjoyment of today, and I really appreciate it. And I love sharing, you know, a couple months ago I got to share a table with Tyler Matrix at a wrestling show.
Right, okay.
And I was like, I've always wanted to read some of this stuff. And so I just loaded him up. I said, dude, read. You know, the more you know, and, you know, and honestly, the more these guys go back and they discover, because there's a lot of things that guys in the 40s and 50s did that nobody did in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Yeah. And if you can go back to that early stuff and discover what was it that put this guy over in the 40s, you do it in 2018, people haven't seen that in decades. People have no idea what that is, you know, and it's little things too. I love Mr. Darius Carter up in New York. I got to know him a couple of years ago. This is a guy, he is a pure heel through and through, doesn't sell T-shirts, you know, won't come out and sign autographs. He's a heel. He's an old school, old fashioned heel. They hate his guts up there. He's over. You know, he's over like $1 million, you know, and just little things like that, you know, and I saw a great documentary too. Samantha Heights was on it, the High Heels, talking about, you know, if you really want to be a heel, you're listening to that crowd, you know, most wrestlers are going to hear the fans going one more time, and they're going to give it to them one more time because this is what the fans want. I'm a heel. I don't care. I'm not going to give it to you one more time. I'm going to fake it, and I'm just not going to do it, and I'm going to make you hate me even more. You know, it's just the little things, you know, really make a huge difference. And, you know, gosh, I've seen so many great, you know, rising stars in the last couple of years. This guy down here, Teddy King out of Owensboro. Oh, yeah, he's phenomenal. Absolutely electric. Yeah. Come out, you may not know who he is. He puts up that microphone, 45 seconds in, you're ready to wring his neck. And then Maddie Max is the same way on the women's side. I've never seen a woman turn a crowd on her so fast as she can. So it's just an exciting time, and it's just always exciting to see somebody new and somebody different. And every now and then you spot one, and you're just like, that one's going to be a star one of these days. And you know, it's just a matter of time, I think, for some of these folks. Yeah, it is, and I feel it does. Yeah, like you said, it does feel like almost like this. The industry swinging a little. It's almost like we're going. It's hard to describe. Almost like the territorial days, although it's not necessarily territories, but it's where it's not just because WWE has the network and the TV contracts and this and that, because now there's so many other avenues for the smaller groups to get out there with their online presence and to be able to have their own streaming services and their own iPay-per-views and their own, you know, utilizing, even if they just utilize, you know, Daily Motion or YouTube or something like that. There's so many ways for them to reach out and for a wrestler to sell himself to somebody that could be around the world somewhere else and make themselves valuable to open doors and broaden their boundaries a little bit. I mean, I wrestled for a brief moment, and we're talking, I don't know, 17, 18 years ago. And back then it was so hard. All you could do was send a VHS to guys and hope that you got a look, and it was so hard. Well, now it's there's so much instant contact and instant access that I'm not going to say it's necessarily easier for the guys per se, but it's easier for them to maybe get an opportunity or at least get a look, and especially for like a promotion to sell their product. You know, it's just a remarkable time. Well, the tools are there. Social media has allowed wrestlers to make connections. They can send a video by email, and you know, the territories no longer exist. The natural loops no longer exist. But guys are building their own loops, you know, and they're finding their own routes. You got Brutal Bob Evans out there, who is, I think, the Seth Godin, the Yoda of independent wrestling. If there's an independent wrestler who doesn't know who Brutal Bob Evans is, go find him, friend him, follow him, read everything he says, and you know, just common sense stuff. You know, share a ride, share a hotel room. You know, find a way to cut expenses so you can actually make money at this. You know, and I mean, you know, send the letters, go out there, do the work, set up the rings. You know, and it's not as easy as, you know, the opportunities. Well, I want to say it's not as easy because back then, my gosh, you had to pay your dues. You set up the ring, and then they beat the hell out of you for an hour before the show.
Yep.
And that was your life for the first 6 months. But now it's all about hustle, and it's all about branding yourself, and it's all about learning how to create a persona, and to find a loop and to make the networks. It's one of the things I love about the indie wrestling community is how supportive and how. Not that there aren't rivalries and there aren't people that, don't want to be in the same locker room together, but there's a lot of support, a lot of encouragement. When one person succeeds, everybody's happy. One person gets, 7 people, it was announced today, just got signed by WWE.
Yeah,
There's 7 spots that just opened up below them where they were at Impact and at Ring of Honor and at PWG and places like that. And then seeing people, I was so excited when I saw Jordan Grace show up.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
My goodness, she's phenomenal. I'm so excited. Yep. She was actually one of the first indie shows that I went to when I was working on Bluegrass Brawlers. I saw her and Heidi Lovelace, who's now Ruby Riott, in a Falls Count Anywhere in Clark County, Indiana match. It was just terrific. I was just, it's fantastic to see these people work so hard and to finally get somewhere and to finally get the recognition they deserve. And like I said, it's a very caring community. It's a very if you're willing to do the work and if you show the respect to the business, iron sharpens iron, and I always point to that house that in Dayton, Ohio, the Dave Christa's got, everybody that goes into that house and is serious about it, is coming out looking like a megastar. Zachary Wentz, Trey Miguel, Myron Reed,
Desmond Xavier.
Yeah. Who heard of Ace Austin before, a year ago? Ace Austin has been on Impact now, and the kid gets better and better every time I see him. So, there's some great stuff going on, and YouTube is another thing too. I think has allowed people, back in, Steve Austin told us the story when he got to Memphis. Dutch Mantell said, "You sit in this chair, you watch every single match out there." And every night, Steve Austin is watching, 3 hours of matches. There's thousands of hours of matches from all wrestling history, from all over the world, Mexico, Japan, everywhere. And, having that access to that library, the people that are utilizing it, they're learning so much. It's just like it's an exciting time. It's really it's a neat business to watch right now.
It is. And I love the new mindset that people are starting to have. And you mentioned Bob Evans. He preaches it a lot of treat yourself like a small business and brand yourself and market yourself and sell yourself. And keep your receipts and watch your expenses and how can you save a buck here to make a buck a week down the road and things like that, and all those aspects of how you run a small business, because it's essentially what you are, and you are that wrestler is the product, and I love that mindset. And it
used to be that the promotion was seen as the business, and you're the independent which they're still the independent contractors, right? But an independent contractor is a business, and I don't know how that mindset worked with those guys back then, but you're absolutely right. Tyler Matrix is a brand, Teddy King is a brand, Matty Max is a brand, Bomb Shelter is a brand, Carnies are a brand, and they're treating themselves that way. They're putting themselves out there that way, finding new and creative ways to market themselves, to promote themselves. And whatever it takes, to get somewhere, I love, every Thursday my Facebook fills up. Hey, got an empty spot in the car. Hey, got an empty spot in the car. Who wants to go to Florida? Who wants to go to Georgia? Who wants to go to Tennessee? And it's, it's just a neat time to be watching this business grow.
It is. And I do. I love, like you, I love seeing that. I love seeing, guys say, hey, I rode along to a show just to make the connection and ended up working the show because there was an opening there. And suddenly this guy, because, he took the ride with no guarantee, he's getting guaranteed bookings from this group because he got the shot and he impressed them. And that's, it's what you do to succeed in anything, whether it's, as a professional wrestler, whether it's as an author or whatever it is, you have to sit there, like you say, and sit there and decide, I'm going to do this. I'm going to put myself out there and see what happens and go for it. And
the wrestling business, the wrestling history is full of stories about, somebody no show to show. It was an opportunity for somebody else. They stepped up, they took it, they ran with it, and their career was made out of that moment. And it goes, and there's, I think it's the story about the Honky Tonk Man, how he ended up Intercontinental Champion.
That's what I just said. Yeah.
It was supposed to be Butch Reed, I think. And
and supposedly Hogan says, hey, what about this guy or whatever, and
right.
Yeah.
So, that's another thing too. If you're on good terms and the guy at the top of the card is going to say, well, what about him? Put him in there,
Yeah, because it's not, I think that's something to be said. It's, of course, you have to have the talent. You have to have that, whatever it is, the X factor and that other. But there's also something to be said for reliability and dependability, and the guy that's going to show up, and the guy that's going to be there early, and the guy that's going to be there respectful, and want to put the best interest of the business in the company, and go maybe take that extra step. That I know in pretty much any endeavor I've ever had, it's. Yeah, you want to work with talented people, but you don't want to work with a talented person that you can't rely on, because there's only so much benefit you can get from that. So, you got to have that balance and those tools. And I do like it. I like when I see, the guys that are the kids that are, listening to Bob and listening to all these other guys and learning. This is social media is kind of the new car ride in a way with some of these guys. You may not hop in a ride with Bob Evans, but you follow his Twitter. It's like you're taking that 3-hour trip with him to the next town and listening to his wisdom. And that's what they used to do then. So it's kind of the new way of doing it. So, so what are you working on right now? So you're working on the Jim Mitchell book. Is that correct? That's what your current project is, or?
Jim Mitchell's the next historical book I've got. Just in the last year, I got out to Dr. D. David Schultz's book, which has done extremely well. We did incredibly well at All In, which was a wonderful time. We sold out up there. All In turned out to be an incredible crowd. Just not only there for the young bucks and Cody and the indie wrestlers, but they were there they knew their history, and they were there for the old guys. And from what I heard, everybody did extremely well. So and then Madman Pondo's book came out a couple months ago. Which I just dropped a bunch off for him. He sent it up to Michigan this weekend. So, but both those books have done very well. The Jim Mitchell will be the next historical book, and then not allowed to say a whole lot about it, but Joseph Schwartz asked me to work on something with the bomb shelter that's going to be really, really exciting too.
I think he dropped a hint about that on Facebook that he was working with you. So
it's going to be a lot. It's a really fun project.
Yeah. Oh, everything they do is. I mean,
they're some. Follow Bob Evans and follow the bomb shelter and follow the Carnies and watch what both those factions are doing with their marketing, with the products, everything they do. And Joseph Schwartz, he amazes me. Yeah. His creativity is just off the charts.
Yeah. You mentioned All In and how they were, taking care of the old timers and the veterans and whatever. I heard Lanny Poffo on his podcast recently told the story, because he went with no guarantee of being able to make the appearance and ended up doing the thing with Jay Lethal at the show. And, he went, paid for his own flight, paid for his own hotel and everything to go and whatever else. And then a few weeks after the show, he gets home and he says he gets a check in the mail for reimbursing him for his hotel and his flight, and then a payoff for making the appearance, not expecting any of that.
That's
he went and they, and that's what he was giving them props because, he said he wasn't expecting that, whatever else, but they took care of him and took care of that. And so,
it was such a great environment up there. I mean, it was a very warm, very friendly, and I mean, it was a little crowded sometimes in the hotel. Nobody cared, and it was just very friendly, very open. Everybody was shaking hands, and a couple guys especially came by to talk to David. Hurricane Helms came by and actually managed to coax David into doing a video with him, which was great. Jerry Lynn came by and talked to him for a while. Could not have been a nicer, cooler guy. I got to meet Haku over breakfast. Let me tell you something. My images of Haku growing up, I'm used to seeing Haku standing next to Andre the Giant. And, of course, I know the legendary stories about Haku and how dangerous this guy is. Well, Haku stands up. He's shaking hands with Dr. D, and he's almost as tall as Dr. D is at 6'4", 6'5", whatever. And I'm seeing how big this guy is, and I'm just trying to imagine the scale of what Andre the Giant would look like. Like, my gosh, Andre had to be huge. Haku was super cool, too. It was just a fun environment and really neat to, you're sitting in one place and, here comes, Lex Luger in his wheelchair being pushed by Road Warrior, and here comes X-Pac with his dog, and all of a sudden Ron Simmons is walking by, and I'm a Florida State fan, too, so I'm sitting there going, oh, my gosh, yeah. So it was, and All In could out of it. Lanny Poffin's spot on All In was it just had us dying. The whole bit with Jay Lethal doing the Macho Man and scolding Brandy Rhodes like she was Miss Elizabeth, just killing us.
Yeah, and I hope people realize and take from it whether you like the Young Bucks as performers and whether you like Cody Rhodes as performers or any of those people on that show, it's really irrelevant almost because. The thing, I mean, like the one spot with Joey Ryan, of course, got a lot of attention. And whether you like that or not, I hope people can look past that and realize that it was a bigger thing than anybody that was on that show. It was how monumental the event and what it meant. And I mean, it was a milestone. I mean, for them to draw what they did, achieve what they did, irregardless of what anybody, likes entertainment-wise from the people on the show. Hopefully they can at least appreciate what this means for the business. And it
was a show unlike the crowd was unlike any I'd ever been a part of. We got there probably about 15 minutes before it started. Everybody was in their seats. People were not walking around. Everybody's in their seats. They were ready for it. They were there for the pre-show matches. They were there all the way to the end. And of course, they ended right on time. As soon as that final match was over, the title screen came on. At that point, Cody comes out, Hangman Page comes out, Omega comes out. They all come down to the ring and they're all talking, and 15 minutes later, one of them goes, "I just want you guys to look around. Nobody's left this building. Everybody's still here." And it was an incredible experience. And the show it certainly has something for everybody and some things for nobody, but I'm not into raunchy humor myself, but my gosh, that was a great Undertaker parody. I gotta admit. And Joey Ryan came. That was another guy came by the table, went out of his way, come by the table. Dr. D, I'm a huge fan of yours. I'm Joey Ryan, a wrestler. It's really an honor to meet you. And I just sat there and smiled. I was like, I'm not going to tell David who that guy is. You don't need to know, but
I tell you.
Joey Ryan, if you're out there, all props and all respect to you, sir. You made that was one of the highlights of my weekend was that handshake.
I think probably the best form of entertainment ever to be hear David Schultz and what he would say to watching that Joey Ryan spot on the show. That would be something. But the event could have very well changed. Because everybody's talking what's going to happen with the Bucks and what's going to happen with Cody and the contracts and there's always the what will they do, but All In to me put even a bigger question mark on the end of that. What will they do? Yeah, because they were successful before.
I'm not a WWE subscriber anymore. I wish I could watch it more. I wish if New Japan's listening, I need a Roku channel. Yeah. But I love New Japan. I'm a subscriber. If they take those 5 guys away, I've still got Naito. I've still got Okada. I've still got Jay. There's so many. Yeah, it's just a different environment. I've still got Juice Robinson. Yep. It just feels different. It looks different. It's so much more exciting. Yeah. I actually enjoy watching it with the Japanese commentary. It's so much more exciting. I don't understand a word. Yeah. I'm trying. I've got the Duolingo app, and by golly, I'm trying, but I haven't gotten past to say, "My name's John. Nice to meet you." So.
Yeah, and but there were things there. I see things come up that make me hope. There's the news I keep seeing today, the reports or the rumor or whatever you want to label it, that Fox has told WWE that they want less comedy, more sports-like feel because of the multi-day programming they plan to do on the weekend. So, and it, hopefully, maybe, the WWE, they always take from others and make it their own. So maybe we will see some of that. I don't know.
And some of the acts, I think if something like that happens, you might see some of the acts like, maybe the Briscoes and stuff, go away. But there's a place for those guys somewhere else,
Yeah, there is,
And those guys are both incredibly – it still kills me that, Tyler Breeze did not get, the best shot he could have on the main roster because if you saw him in NXT, he was fantastic.
Yeah, yeah.
He's Lance Storm's student,
Yeah. Well, and let's be honest. There's always been acts like that rely more on the entertainment. There's always, even back in the territory days, there were guys that, could not work a lick and got by on the promo. There's always those guys there. There's always something for everybody. And I'm like you. I'm not a big WWE product guy. They've got a lot of talent that I like that I just, it's hard to watch them there. They don't, I don't know. Yeah,
it's just the way they present them. And there's just something, I've enjoyed, until they had to bring the Bellas back, I enjoyed everything they were doing with Ronda Rousey. Mm-hmm. If you expect me to buy that Nikki Bella has a chance against Ronda Rousey, no. I don't care how you frame it, no. I'm not buying on that one. But, there's certain folks I really enjoy watching and everything. But, I'll tell you, the happy medium is NXT. I've been in NXT live a couple of times. Mm-hmm. It is, and an NXT live show, especially a house show, it is the perfect blend between the spectacle and the grand production of WWE and an independent show. Yeah. If you go to a Raw house show, if you go to SmackDown, or especially if you go to TV taping, they're not going to acknowledge you. Yeah. The wrestlers on the ring, they're looking at that camera, they're focused on that camera, they're playing to the camera side, on and on. You go to an NXT show, they're all playing to the crowd. They're yelling at the kid in the second row.
Yep.
And it's just Adam Cole comes out. Everybody's like, "We want your shirt. We want your shirt." He goes over, "You want my shirt?" He holds it out over here on the one side. Goes to the other side. See which side is yelling about it, and then he just drops it right at his feet.
Yeah.
And everybody cheers him even more because Adam Cole can't do anything to get booed.
Right.
As much heel as he wants to be, but it's the perfect happy medium, and the work is off the charts.
Yep.
I mean, and we got Chris Hero down there.
Yeah.
And I finally got to see War Machine. Those guys are absolutely amazing. And, but I mean, to me, that's SmackDown comes to town, okay. Raw comes to town, okay. NXT comes to town, I gotta go.
Yeah,
it's a different feel.
Yeah, and for always being so far ahead on the production and camera work, they've always been for the however many decades now. The WWE, I can't stand their camera work now, and I don't know what they even call that. It's like this in and out zoom thing they do on some. I don't know if it's supposed to try to add more effect or feel. I mean, it literally makes my head spin sometimes. It's almost chaotic.
Just put a steady camera on and let us watch them do their thing.
It's so many cuts and so many things. I'm like, man, it makes me dizzy sometimes. And I guess I'm a 2-cam kind of guy. There's the hard cam and there's a ringside cam. That's what I grew up on, and I'm pretty happy with that. So, well, all right. Well, thanks for coming on, John. Let's wrap this up. Tell everybody where they can follow you on social media, where they can find your books and things like that if they want to check you out more.
Sure. My website is eatsleepwrestle.com. They can find me on Twitter at John Cosper. That's JOHN COSPER. They can look up John Cosper. They can look up Eat Sleep Wrestle on Facebook. I also have a John Cosper author page on Facebook, and johncosper.com. That's where all my fiction stuff is. I'm hoping to get back to that a little bit more down the road, but wrestling's been good to me. I've really, really enjoyed, watching, the business grow the last couple of years, being a part of it, getting to know some of these amazing people. I'm a small business myself. Eat Sleep Wrestle is a registered LLC. And just like these independent wrestlers that are trying to brand themselves, I'm trying to brand myself as an author. Yeah. These people inspire me. They motivate me. When I see them working their tail off, when I see them pulling in and, rolling in with their bags and setting up their gimmick tables and stuff like that, watching them hustle, hearing them say, well, I'm going here, I'm going there. You folks inspire me, every single one of you guys out there. And love you guys, appreciate you guys, and so proud to be a part of the independent wrestling community, to be a part of, the wrestling historical community. And I could go on and on, but eatsleepwrestle.com is my website. And like I said, Dr. D's book is out now. Madman Pondo's book is out now. If you want signed books, get in touch with me because I've got autographed copies of both of those from those guys. Yep.
Well, there you go. So look up John. Like you said, follow him on Twitter. Visit his site, eatsleepwrestle.com. Thanks, John, for coming on tonight and joining us. And we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to have part 1 of our interview with the legendary Les Thatcher. So stick around. If you are looking for the best books, DVDs, and posters on classic wrestling nostalgia, then you want to visit crowbarpress.com. There are literally dozens of titles there, including biographies of the likes of Bruiser Brody, Ole Anderson, Ivan Koloff, and of course, Dick the Bruiser, as we spoke about here on the Dave Dynasty Show. You want to visit crowbarpress.com for all of your classic wrestling nostalgia needs. Again, that is crowbarpress.com. And welcome back to the Dave Dynasty Show. I am Dave Dynasty, and I am joined by a very, very special guest. I am joined by Les Thatcher. Les, how are you this evening?
I'm good, Dave, and happy to be with you. We've been playing around trying to get this hooked up for months, have we not?
Yeah, we have. I've been doing the show for 2 years, and when I first started, you were right there in the top 10 guys that I wanted to interview at some point. And here we are 2 years later, and I'm finally getting to do it. So
wow. I'm not really that hard to get to. It's just we just haven't been able to make the time. But here we are, as I hope the show has gone well for 2 years.
It has. It has very well, and I appreciate that. So, but we're going to talk about you, though, Les. We're going to talk about you now, and I'm going to stroke your ego a little bit because to me, Les Thatcher, you are one of the greatest workers I've ever seen in wrestling, and to me, you are so underappreciated for everything you've contributed to this business. So I am so glad that we get to talk to you, and hopefully turn a little eyes on you and in your career and what you've done and are still doing, what you're still doing with the business. So,
well, thank you. I appreciate. I just celebrated my 58th year this past 4th of July. It was I had my first match in July the 4th, 1960. So I'm like now at about 58 and a half years into this crazy business.
Yeah. So let's talk about Les prior to wrestling. You were born in Cincinnati, is that correct?
Yeah, actually, yeah. Born and raised in the suburbs of Cincinnati, and actually got a birthday coming up here. What today is the 15th? In 13 days. Well, I will be 78 years old.
Oh, wait a minute, hold on. But this will come out. So by the time we release this, it'll just be about a week out from your birthday. So happy birthday, Les. So we'll make sure we plug that when we release it. So, so what was it like growing up in Cincinnati in the Midwest at that time? And what was your childhood like? And what sport? Did you play sports, or what were you doing with your time?
Yeah, I talk about I kind of lived the happy days. Right, or American Graffiti, that sort of thing. I was, sports. I got into organized sports actually at age 7, playing Cub Scout baseball.
Oh yeah,
and played organized baseball, sandlot football. Played a couple years of high school basketball. Actually started racing on the drag strip before I had a driver's license at age 15.
Wow.
And it was. My parents were very supportive of everything, just wonderful people, and then started wrestling at the when I got involved in wrestling, it was the YMCA's here because this high schools had no wrestling.
Right.
There was no organized school wrestling in the city of Cincinnati when I was a kid. So, but became a fan about age 9, I guess it was. Saw my first wrestling on a black and white 10-inch screen at a neighbor's house. We didn't even have a TV at the time. Okay. And so I was hooked from that point on. But, I was involved in sports and like I say, hot rods and drag racing. And like I say, if you watched Happy Days or the movie American Graffiti, that was pretty much my childhood, my teen years.
Yeah. So who were you watching on TV? Is this when Al Haft was running Ohio in the area, or?
Yes. Yeah? Yes, absolutely. Yeah. The first show we saw was Friday night. It was from Cincinnati's Music Hall, which is still up. I mean, it's a historical venue now, but it was. But Haft actually was on WLWT here in Cincinnati. Mm-hmm. He was on WLWD in Dayton and WLWC in Columbus.
Okay.
But we also here we got wrestling. Talk about an overload. We got wrestling out of Chicago, wrestling out of New York, the Kinescope tape from Hollywood Wrestling. Texas wrestling, and plus we picked up Dayton's show and Cincinnati's show here. So the part of town we lived in. So and of course Haft was one of the biggest promoters in the country. He ran, besides Ohio, Michigan, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Indiana.
Yeah,
and they had probably 70 to 75 guys on a roster. They were running 2 to 3 towns a night during that period. And virtually every top star that I saw on any of the TV shows at some point in time came through this area.
Yeah. So who were you a fan of? Who were your favorites when you were a kid and you were watching?
Buddy Rogers was my childhood idol.
Oh yeah. So did you ever get to meet Buddy when you
never did.
No?
Never. I always I look back and I think in my in-ring career I would have loved to have worked with him once, once, but we never actually were in the same territories ever.
Yeah. So at what point when you're watching and everything else, did that click in your mind that, you know what, I think I'd like to do this. This is something that I think I'd like to commit my life to. I
was always fascinated by it, but I think what really is when, in my early teens, I guess, like I say, my mother had this big long pillow, which at the time was when I was 9 years old, as tall as I was, but I'd get down on the floor in front of our TV and practice, and go through the whole rigmarole of watching how the guys put a headlock on and that sort of thing, and played at it. But then as age 12, I started wrestling the YMCA's, but as far as becoming a pro, I guess it was probably in 1954 or somewhere in there is the thought of actually being a professional wrestler, started to play in the back of my head.
Yeah.
And so, of course, back then, it was closed shop. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't just, there was no wrestling, it wasn't a wrestling school on every street corner. And, so by the time I was late 17 or just probably about the age of 18, I started trying to, I'd talk to some of the referees and then I got in the car and I drove up to Reynoldsburg, Ohio, which is where Al Half's office was, and talked to I didn't know what a booker was at the time, but it was Frankie Taliber.
Yeah.
And he was real, at the time I was about 175 pounds. And he said, well, kid, you need some more experience, put on some size and this and that. So I had pretty much run into a dead end, where do I go from here?
Yeah.
And so anyway, Wrestling Review magazine was the big monthly wrestling magazine that was on all the newsstands. And, of course, I had a copy, every time it came out. Mm-hmm. And I saw the very first ever pro wrestling school was Tony Santos in Boston.
Uh-huh.
And there was they had done an article in Wrestling Review on Tony Santos' school, and it showed a picture of the school and how he was helping aspiring young athletes who had an interest in becoming professional wrestlers. So I thought, wow, well, this is my end. So I wrote him a letter, and he sent me back a trifold. I wish I'd saved that, and of course I didn't. But
right,
a trifold, showing a picture of the ring and say, become a TV star, travel the world, and the whole pitch.
Yeah.
And it was for the absorbent price of $300 for 6 months. So anyway, made contact. And in February of 1960, I was 19 years old, got on a bus, a Greyhound bus here, and went to Boston. And that's where it started.
Yeah. So you mentioned your debut. Tell us about that. When you said it was on July 4th. What year was that again?
1960.
1960. So who was that against?
Started training in February 60 and had my first match in July the 4th, 1960. Actually, I wrestled twice that day.
Okay.
It was at a fairgrounds in Blue Hills, Maine, and there were 4 of us on the card. Now, when I work with young guys today and they talk, they come in the door smart, obviously, to the business. And, I said, I started my training in February, and my first match July the 4th. I said, when they smarten me up, and they'll say, when? I said, July the 4th, that morning.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you over that 6, you kind of got an idea, maybe, but you obviously didn't want to open your mouth. And, of course, it was breaking in. It was a whole other ball game. I went up there, like I say, 19 years old and full of myself, and I was an athlete, man, and I was, and quite frankly, Dave, they handed me my ass for the first few weeks, right?
Yeah.
Because they weren't going to smarten you up until they were sure you were going to stick. But they had fun with us, some of the veterans that would come in, some of the guys on the roster, and work with you. I mean, nobody actually beat you up, but they let you know they were there and that they were, but then the way they actually taught us to work without smartening us up would say, well, now you two guys, we want you to practice holds, how to apply them, how to get in them, how to put them on and so forth. But you guys aren't getting paid, and you guys don't matter. There's not going to be a winner or a loser, so it's just don't apply pressure. Put the holes on, but don't apply pressure.
Right.
So that's how we actually learned to work. So the morning of July the 4th, I was living in a $10 a week rooming house right across the street on Westland Avenue. Tony's gym originally was in a warehouse in the middle of a parking lot at the corner of Mass Avenue and Westland Avenue in Boston, and that was in the Back Bay area. And so anyway, I was living in the rooming house across the street, and the morning of the 4th, one of his kids came over and said, Dad wants to see you. So, of course, my first thought was, I've done something wrong, right? He's going to rip on me here. So anyway, I go over, and he said, you have your gear, which I had Alma Mills, Tiny Mills' niece, worked in the office there, and she made jackets and that sort of thing. So I had a jacket, I had my boots, and in anticipation of starting, And so he said, "You've got all your." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, today's your day. Go back and pack your bag and come back, and we'll sit down and talk." So I went and got my gear, came back, and he said, "Now, you know the way you guys practice holes, how you didn't apply pressure and so forth." So I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, that's what you're going to do today. We don't want anybody to get hurt. We want to, break you in slow." So anyway, the other three guys on this card, there were just four of us, and there were three matches in Blue Hills, Maine that day. It was Joe Sasso, who had played football at Boston College, and Bull Montana, who I'd bought tickets to see as a younger kid,
right,
and Cowboy Ronnie Hill. And so between Boston and Blue Hills, Maine, is where they actually, that my education came in that car. We all four rode together. And the matches, it was a 4th of July celebration at the Blue Hills Fairgrounds, and the ring was set up in the middle of the racetrack in front of the grandstand like they do so many places. And so anyway, on the trip up, that's, they kind of smarted me up and eased me into it. So Ronnie and I opened the show. Bull and Joe worked the second match, and then Joe and I came back against Ronnie and Bull in the main event, and that was where it started.
So, okay, so who were you or where all were you working for in the early days there? Was it you working, was Tony running the shows there like that, or was he just booking?
Yeah, Tony ran. Actually, there was no competition. At the time in Boston, there was no wrestling television at all.
Okay.
And the only people that ran the Garden, Tony actually ran the Garden once in a great while, but Eddie Quinn, the promoter out of Montreal, would come in and run the Garden occasionally.
Okay. And
other than that, there was no, Tony basically ran New England. He ran a lot of the towns, a lot of the beach towns during, the summer season. But he had regular towns too, like Brockton, Mass, Revere Beach, so forth and so on. And then in the summer, he'd run the fairs. So we worked the athletic tents in the fairs during the summer. And where, you just take on all comers and, but I mean, they had, we had a couple midgets, a couple girls, and so if there was nobody challenging anybody, they put matches together, and sometimes you'd wrestle 4, 5, 6 times a day, in those tents, at the fairs. But so that was the first 2 years. I worked with, I stayed with Tony. I came over Christmas in 1960. Stayed home for a month or so, went back up, and stayed until November of '61, and then I headed back down to Ohio. And the first promotion I worked with in early '62 was Jim Barnett's office out of Indianapolis.
Right. Okay. So what was it like working for Barnett? You hear all these stories about Jim Barnett. What was it like working for him?
Jim. Well, that's where the name Thatcher came from.
Okay.
Jim, my real last name is Malady, and it's Irish, Malady.
Okay.
And, of course, in the Boston area, the Irish heritage is strong. So the name has always been mispronounced. I mean, you see people as Malady. I mean, there's all sorts of pronunciations, but the real way it's said is Malady. So anyway, when I first went to work for Barnett, they used my real last name. And Jim, being a perfectionist as he was, got tired of hearing the ring announcers or the TV commentators mispronounce my name. And so I'd been with them, I guess, 5 or 6 weeks. And Les Ruffin came into the dressing room in Indianapolis TV on a Saturday morning and said, the old man's tired of hearing people butcher your last name. He wants to change it to Thatcher. And, of course, I was barely 21 years old, so I didn't care what they called me. I just wanted to wrestle. So I've been Les Thatcher ever since. But that first appearance for Barnett was in Indianapolis TV. I was, you talk about a baby face. I was 21. I turned, my birthday is in October, and I turned 21 in October 61. And so when they finally called me, I'd sent pictures and some background to the Indianapolis office, and when Les Ruffin called me, he said, "Do you have proof that you're 21?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." So anyway, you watch TV, but I had never been on a television show. So anyway, I walk into the dressing room at the TV station in Indianapolis that first Saturday morning, and there is Fritz von Erich, Dick the Bruiser, the original Sheik, Art Nelson, Stan Hollick, Joe Blanchard. I'm trying to think if I'm missing anybody here. And, these are all people I bought tickets to watch, right?
Yeah, right.
And I'm thinking, man, I was sort of nervous. I worked twice. We did one live show, and then they did a taping. And so that first Saturday, I got to work with, forgot to mention, Angelo Poffo, Randy Savage's dad.
Right. Yep.
And I worked with the Sheik on the tape, and Angelo in the live show, and that's how it started with the first big promotion I was with.
Yeah. So how did you take the Sheik when you first met him? Did he break character at all with you knowing he's going to work you, or did it?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
In a dressing room, but that's the thing with Eddie. He lived his gimmick. I mean,
right.
If back then, if you had one, Joyce, his wife, she was his slave girl, that went to the ring with him and carried the prayer rug and that whole thing.
Yeah.
But like when they pulled in the gas station, she's the one who said, fill it up.
Right.
They went into a restaurant. She ordered his food, right? So, I mean, he lived the gimmick that, he was a college graduate here, in Michigan. But the gimmick was that he was an Arabian Sheik and he couldn't speak English.
Yeah.
So that was the way they played it.
Yeah. So were you still working in the area as like Bruiser and Snyder started taking over Indianapolis and the Sheiks started taking over Detroit? So how much in the mix were you of that and all that was going on and what was your perspective of all that takeover and the change in the guard then?
Well, again, as a young guy, just, being able, I was living my dream, Dave,
right.
And so the actual politics of the whole thing, did I care? No, not really, right? I was just having a ball. But being a local guy and today it's all about jobbers, but back then, you learned this business by looking at the lights, and they were called carpenters because you helped build the stars.
Yep.
Right. Mm-hmm. So anyway, actually, I along with a couple other local guys who later on we went on the road together. We worked for Sheik and for Bruiser.
Right.
Because actually it was never a time when they ran in the same town at the same time, or Wilbur and Dick pretty much. Sheik ran Michigan and upper part of Ohio, and they ran central Indiana and up into Chicago and so forth. So at that point in time, there was really no overlap. So we could work for both offices. My God, I couldn't even begin to tell you how many times in the ring with the Sheik or with Bruiser or any of those guys. But back then, that's how you earned a reputation to be used a higher spot on the card, was to be able to go in and get the job done as they needed it done, right? To get them over, and so it was, and back then too, that was every time you changed territory, it was like going to a new school, a new college, because you were working with guys who were stars in the business, who had worked at a top level. And it was just basically, you shut your mouth, opened your ears, and went along for the ride because, back then it was all improv.
Yeah.
I mean, there was no such thing as going out to the ring and walking through a finish or a match or laying out a match. And I wouldn't even know how to do that. Yeah. I mean, if you held a gun to my head and said, Les, I want you to plan out a 10-minute match step for step, I'd just say, shoot me, Dave, because I couldn't do that, So it was... and that was part of, these guys, I hear all the stories, and I know that it happened occasionally where some young guy would, get an attitude and think he was better than he really was, or think he had belonged someplace that he probably didn't at that time. And there were times that guys got their asses handed to them, but to me, I never ran. I mean, there might have been times where maybe some veteran didn't give me as much as I should have got, but it was never a point where I had to fight my way out of the ring, right? Or I thought that I was my health was in jeopardy, and it was just a great learning. And like I say, for a kid who had been a fan since I was 9 years old, to work with all these guys that I'd bought tickets to see and to see on television, man, it was just I was having a ball.
Yeah. So working in the Midwest in that time, did you encounter Wild Bull Curry when he was in the area?
I never worked with Bull. Actually,
Nope.
I met him. He worked for Santos up in New England.
Oh,
you know, when he was home in the area.
Yeah.
And well, several stars are up there. I never had the opportunity to work with him. When I went back after I'd come home for Christmas in 1960, when I went back, I took my car and I had a decent car. So when like Pat O'Connor would come to town, or Argentina Rocca, or Pampero Firpo, he would have me drive him around to the town. So I had the opportunity to talk to these guys in the car, and you know, and they were all, you know, they were good guys to learn from and to get an education from, you know. So it was a great time for me, you know, in terms of learning. Funny. With Rocca, he had these big, nasty cigars, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't the dead of winter in Boston, but it was the weather was, it was a pretty good chill on. And Tony would fire up one of them cigars in the car, and I'd crack my window because it was suffocating. He'd say, "Kid, can you roll up the window?" And I thought, yes, I'll die of smoke inhalation rather than make Argentina Rocca mad, right?
Yeah, really.
But it was, you know, it was a great time. And it was, I mean, the thing, I don't know that there would have been a better time to break into business, because I got to work with some of the best, you know, and if I wasn't working with them, I was sitting in the locker room listening to them talk or riding in the car with them, and it was just an amazing education.
Yeah, so when did you kind of move down south then and kind of get involved in some of the NWA territories down there and really start sinking your teeth in down there?
Well, I first time I went south was in '63.
Okay.
I went into the Carolinas for the first time in the spring of '63 for Jim Crockett Sr. Actually, to get in there, I had to have references, and Sandy Scott, another Ohio boy, Jim Grabmeyer, and Johnny Heidemann, are three wrestlers that I'd worked with in the territory here. When I say the Indianapolis office, Barnett ran Ohio, Kentucky, Michigan, West Virginia, so we worked all over the area. So they gave me references, and that was the first time it actually, other than working the main territory here and Boston, or New England actually, that was the first time I'd been to the South. And it was that was an education in more than one ways too, because I grew up in a colorblind environment, right? I mean, my Sandlot baseball coach was a black gentleman who taught me a lot about being competitive and so forth and so on. And the team was like half and half. I went to school, you know, with blacks, and I mean, so to in 1963 to go south and see there's a water fountain for the white people and a water fountain for the black people. Yeah. My mother just knew that with my liberal upbringing that I'd probably get lynched by the Ku Klux Klan in the South. But anyway, that was my first venture down there, and I stayed down there with Crockett for about 6 months. Okay. And well, you know, back then too, as you're learning the business, you know, your shelf life in one territory isn't all that long. Right. You know, although that was a big territory. And also, well, actually, let me back up a little bit. In '62, out of the Indianapolis territory, I went to Calgary for the summer, in the summer of '62 for 3 months. Okay. Actually, almost 4 months for Stu. And so that was a good education, working the loop up there. And no, I didn't go to the dungeon. Everybody said you went to the no. I was invited, but I was, as dumb as I was as a young man, I was smart enough not to go to the dungeon. Yeah, right. Well, you actually won the NWA Rookie of the Year in '66, and I mean, you beat out some stiff competition. I mean, was that not Terry Funk's rookie year as well? I mean, yes. I just talked to Terry the other day. We were talking about, you know, the first time we met was actually in '67 when Eddie Graham I was wrestling at work in the Mobile territory, and Eddie had contacted Rocky McGuire, the booker there, and said, he's going to be the NWA Rookie of the Year. We want him here in this territory. So anyway, that's the first time that Terry, he'd been away from home and wrestled other places, but the first time he actually had uprooted and gone and settled in another territory was he came into Tampa in '67. So we've been friends ever since. But there was myself, Terry, and Bobby Shane.
Right. Okay.
Were the guys that were. So I always make joke. I said Shane and Terry made the money. I got the trophy.
Yeah, that's right. So and these times, those years, you were linked a lot to Roger Kirby and Dennis Hall, right? You guys did a cousin thing, right?
Well, I mentioned a couple other guys that we worked for, both Bruiser and Sheik. When they were running opposition to one another, it was Roger and Dennis. They're both natives of Indiana, right? Yeah. And so we were all, well, actually, I guess Dennis, I don't know if I started before both of them or not. Dennis probably started around the same time as I did. Roger a little later. But anyway, we got to be friends, and we'd hook up and when we could and ride to the towns together and make trips together. So, that was in '66. That was actually when I went south and basically never left again. But I had I'd been to Kansas City territory, and then in '66 went out to Phoenix and was out there for several months. And when I came back home, I was working some spots for Bruiser and Wilbur, but was looking for something to do. And Roger and Dennis had been in Atlanta, and so. And writing, for kids listening, you wrote letters? Yes, we didn't have cell phones or internet. We either talked on, and a long-distance call, you were charged by the minute. So anyway, and communicating back and forth, and they sent me a letter and said, well, would you like to come in down here? We were having a good time. And Leo Garibaldi, who I had watched on television when Leo was a tag team with his dad, Gino. Out of L.A. And so would you like to come in? And I said, yeah, if something's available. So one day my phone rings, and it's Kirby, and he said, Dennis and I are in the office with Leo. Leo wants to talk to you. So Leo got on the phone. He said, they say you could actually work, can you? And I said, well, I hope so. So anyway, they gave me a start date. So Dennis was getting ready to went down to Florida for a while. So Kirby and I were sharing the apartment. And Dennis and Roger actually were cousins by marriage.
Okay.
They, not blood cousins, but cousins by marriage. So we just decided to try the trio thing, the wrestling cousins. So Kirby and I worked as a team in Atlanta while we were there, and then we went into Louisiana for Lee Fields, and that's where the whole thing started. Then Mobile, then Tampa. Then Charlotte, and on and on and on. But, Leo Garibaldi was one of my mentors, too. What an amazing, brilliant booker. I mean, just brilliant. And so as well as, in '73, '74, when I went in to work the office in Atlanta during the war and shared the desk with Gordon at TV. Leo was the booker then too, so we were in the office together every day, and I learned so much from him. But that's the thing. When I see the kids today struggling to learn how to tell a story in the ring or this and that, I thought I was just blessed. I mean, I was to work with so many brilliant minds and great workers in the ring as well.
Yeah. Well, going back to Roger Kirby, I always said Roger Kirby again to me is one of the most underappreciated talents in wrestling. I remember, later when he came back to Indianapolis and was teaming with Paul Christie, and he was always so good. And I don't think his name gets remembered as much as it should for what he did. Yeah.
I make a joke. I said I was always a contender for the junior heavyweight title. I never won the belt, but before Kirby got before Nelson Royal got the title, he and I were partners, and before Kirby got the title, he and I had been partners. Yeah. I said I train the future junior heavyweight champions.
That's right. Yeah.
But I think the greatest compliment I've ever heard given to Kirb was Harley on a documentary about Kansas City wrestling said the difference between myself and Roger Kirby is I got a break.
Right. Yeah.
So I mean that's high praise.
Sure.
It really is. Yeah, Curb is a hell of a worker. I mean, see, with us, we were always baby faces, right? But I mean, so many people know Roger as a heel.
Yeah.
But he was an amazing talent. We just had a great time, the three of us together.
Yeah, and later you went up and worked in the Maritimes, correct? And
yes, that's where I got involved in television.
That's
initially.
right.
That was in 1970.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to bring it up. How did that come about with you getting into the TV and the announcing and the broadcasting side more? How did that come up there?
Well, the crazy thing is we're going to get into my whole several of the things. Well, as a trainer involved in magazines, those all just sort of popped up. It wasn't like I prepared for it or pointed my career toward that. But Rudy Kay, that ran the Maritimes, that opened the territory up there, which ran from April to mid-October. Rudy was my next door neighbor in Charlotte. Dennis and I had a townhouse in Charlotte, and Rudy lived next door to us. And we traveled together a lot. And, of course, you're filling time on the road, and you talk about a little this and that and the other thing. And I had always had a thought of being a disc jockey, like Wolfman Jack or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And so you realize, too, when I, like the television commentators, when I was a kid, were usually a local kiddie show or a news guy or something, right? So many times they weren't concerned with actually getting to wrestling. I mean, you're getting $25 or something, to do the show, and so it was more to push themselves locally as well. So anyway, when I went to Tampa for the first time for the NWA Rookie of the Year thing, I met Gordon. And first time I ever saw Gordon doing television, I said, "Oh my God!" So anyway, Rudy and I, I went to Charlotte from there, and so this is when Rudy and I were on the road together. And I said, maybe when I hang it up, I'd like to try doing play-by-play. I said, I'm really well. Gordon and I got to be buddies, not just because of wrestling, but because of race cars too. Okay. He owned part of the Golden Gate Speedway in St. Petersburg, and me with my drag racing background, and he and I, just bonded with that as well as the wrestling. So anyway, I'm up there wrestling, and the Cormiers, Rudy and his brother, the Beast, and Leo Burke, and they were noted for their ribs, right? So we lived in Moncton. We wrestled in Moncton on Monday night. We went to Halifax on Tuesday, stayed over, did TV in Halifax on Wednesday morning, and went to St. John from there. So anyway, this was, I guess, maybe a little less than 2 months into my run up there. Actually, it was the only place I ever worked heel. In 20 years in the ring, I worked heel there for a couple months.
Yeah.
Because in 1970, if you were an American citizen in Canada and you weren't in the Army, they had figured you were a draft dodger anyway, right?
Right, yeah, right.
Which I wasn't, but anyway, that's, that. So Rudy had this idea to bring me in as a heel and was going to turn me babyface. He was going to team me with Freddie Sweet Ten, and then finally we would, turn me babyface. So anyway, we're getting ready to, on Monday, before Moncton, he calls me and it just started shooting the breeze. And finally he says, when we were running the roads in the Carolinas, you talked about, could you like to, try wrestling broadcasting and stuff? And I said, yeah. He said, well, I want tomorrow, or he said, when we get ready to go to Halifax tomorrow, bring a suit and a tie or sport coat, dress clothes. And I said, why? He said, because you're going to be the announcer on my TV. Huh. And of course, at first I'm thinking, okay, he's pulling my leg, right? This is I'm going to take all these clothes and I'm going to dress up on Wednesday morning, and everybody's going to laugh at me when I come into the studio, right?
Yeah.
And finally, no, he said, my announcer is from Toronto originally. He had a death in the family in Toronto, and he's got to go back there. And I guess it was some really close relative, because he had to stay to help set up their, get their affairs in order and so forth.
Right.
So he said, I need somebody, and you're going to do it. And I said, really? And he said, yes. So that Wednesday morning in Halifax, cold. Now, I'd been interviewed, I'd been interviewed by other people. but I didn't know how to cue in and out of a segment. I had no idea. I'd never seen a run sheet. And realized, too, back then, Dave, that it was just a single guy on the desk. There weren't broadcast teams.
Right, yeah.
So anyway, cold and inexperienced, I sat down and did my first ever television show as the play-by-play and the color guy and everything else. And so some way or another, I got through it. And so, did a couple weeks, and Rudy finally called me. He said, look, you're doing a good job for us. And he said, I'm just going to leave the guy who was doing the announcing in Toronto. I want you to finish out the season, and I'll pay you extra, over and above what you're making as a wrestler, and you finish out the season for me. I said, okay, fine. So that's how it started.
Huh. That's remarkable. So, and you talked about all these different things you've done. I mean, what about, what is it, 1972, where you essentially create the first wrestling T-shirt for the Briscoes? And how did that come about?
Well, three of us sitting around, probably having a couple beers, and like I say, I was Leo Garibaldi was one of my mentors, and in doing so, you get the creative bug. So, I had said to a couple promoters that I thought, there's baseball T-shirts and this kind of T-shirt and that kind of T-shirt. And back in there, and through the 60s, like the rock concerts and stuff, that's when T-shirts first started popping up, right?
Yeah, right.
And so I had mentioned T-shirts to Mr. Crockett.
Yeah.
But he wasn't, it wasn't like he just said, nah, that's nonsense. It's just he wasn't interested.
Yeah.
So Jack and Jerry and I were sitting around, like I say, probably drank a couple beers. And we're just talking about the business in general. And I brought up the idea, and I said, I think, like with you guys, because you're both over as baby faces and one thing and another. And they said, Jack said, well, let's do it. I said, really? He said, yeah. Well, I'll chip in, and we'll put together a shirt. So we did. That was, and Jerry Lawler was just getting, a good start in the business. Mm-hmm. So for the absorbent fee of $25, he did the pen and ink drawing for the first T-shirt. Yeah. I wish I had that original artwork now.
Really?
I'm not sure what it'd be worth, but I'm sure more than $25.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, to get a plug-in for you there, that you've got kind of a recreation of that design on your Pro Wrestling Tee store, right? That's for sure. Yeah.
It's actually, it is the original artwork.
Okay.
Reproduced at Pro Wrestling Tees. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you can be a part of history.
That's right. Yeah.
And but that was 1972. That was the very first ever Pro Wrestling T-shirt. And Jerry and I, Jack, of course, was just in and out of the Charlotte territory at the time. Of course, they were prepping him, to be world champion. Mm-hmm. And in 73, so and he was living in Florida at the time. Jerry and I would take him to the buildings and sell them, and then we start advertising them in the programs and one thing and another. We almost in the southeastern United States, I don't know if they still have a chain of rich department stores or not, but a wrestling fan had approached us and said, well, maybe we can get those for you in the rich department stores, which they talked to us, but it just never materialized. But the point was we weren't merchandising guys or marketers, so there wasn't a huge markup in these things. And some of the buildings, I remember the Scope in Norfolk wanted 40%, so we just never bothered to sell the shirts there. But then once the promotions saw us that, those guys are actually selling those things, then they wanted a piece. And then, of course, each building, got 10% or a base fee or whatever. So at some point it was just like, okay, enough's enough. We were selling them, I think, for $3.50 a piece. Yeah. That's what the T-shirts went for at the time. And so we just discontinued because, trying to do that, and like I say, the promoters want a piece, the building wants a piece, and we just didn't have that that much profit margin built in.
Yeah. So when did you get started then, as another aspect, with like programs and the magazines, and how did you start doing that kind of work with some of the promotions?
Well, that started with Mr. Jim Crockett Sr. as well as doing TV in the United States. When I came back into the States out of the Maritimes, when I'd been in Nashville at the time, and I went up to work for Rudy out of Nashville. I came back into Nashville for a while, and then went to I wanted to get out of there, so I went down to Tampa, and the Crockett's Mr. Jim Sr. was still alive at the time, and they were looking for a number 2 babyface team to come in to work in behind Becker and Weaver, who were the top babyface team at the time. And so they were calling around different territories, and Louis Tillett recommended Danny Miller and myself. So we went up to the Carolinas. This was my 3rd time in the Carolinas. I've been in there in 67 and part of 68. And so we went up there. So the whole magazine thing was, this was in 71, and I was looking at some magazines of Mr. Crockett's, actually photo albums, like it's just had a picture of the wrestler and a little bio sketch underneath, right? And like 2 pictures to a page, and more of like for autographs, sell them to kids or adults for that matter, and they would get the wrestler, pass them around and get the wrestler to sign them at the shows. So anyway, I was looking at these, Mr. Crockett, and I said, these look really, really nice. And he said, yeah. He said, we don't do this anymore. I said, well, why? And I don't remember, to be honest with you. It was whoever had handled that, or wasn't with him any longer, or had moved out of the state or whatever. So I said, well, it's a shame. He said, well, why don't you try it? I said, excuse me? He said, why don't you try it? I said, really? He said, sure. We got a whole file cabinet full of pictures, and you got to write some bio sketches and design a cover. And he said, and I'll, we'll, get them printed and everything, and I'll pay you for doing it, and then cut you in for a piece of what we sell. I said, really? He said, yeah. But then also, again, as I said to you earlier, a lot of the stuff I got involved in was just by accident, really.
By chance,
it wasn't a plan. and that's how the whole magazine thing started. But then the same way with TV.
You've heard him here on the Dave Dynasty Show as a guest and as host of the monthly Graham's Gallery episodes. And now you can hear his stories. You can own a copy of Confessions of a Big-Time Wrestler, the audio book from Dr. Jerry Graham Jr., former multi-tag team champion in WWA and owner of Bruiser Bedlam. You can hear all of his encounters with the various wrestlers, places, and promotions he's worked as he tells about his colorful, long, and illustrious career. You can have your own copy for only $25, and that includes shipping and handling. It's very simple. Go on Facebook, look up Jerry Jaffe, Jaffe, send him a private message, and make arrangements to purchase a copy of Confessions of a Big-Time Wrestler now. You will not regret this purchase. And there you have it. Another episode of the Dave Dynasty Show in the books. Thank you for joining us this week. Thank you to John Cosper for coming on and helping me open the show in the guest co-host spot. And, of course, special guest, Les Thatcher. Thank you to him for agreeing to do the interview. Part 2 of that interview will be coming next week with guest co-host George Shire. We're going to talk some old school AWA and so on and so forth. And George knows Les Thatcher. They've been friends for many, many years, so we're going to talk a little bit about Les, too. Should be a great episode next week. Remember to support us in whatever way you access the podcast. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share. Leave a rating and review if you're on iTunes. And make sure you visit DaveDynasty.com for links to all of our social media. We're on Facebook and Twitter. And be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube. If you would like to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/TheDaveDynasty or paypal.me/TheDaveDynasty. Or if you would like, go to PROWRESTLINGTEES.com, look up the Dave Dynasty Show, or click on the link at DaveDynasty.com and buy a t-shirt. We have a few up there now, and a new one to be debuting very, very soon. We've submitted the artwork, just waiting for the approval. It might actually even be up there by the time this episode is released. So make sure you visit that and buy a shirt and financially support us. We bring you this thing free every week. So help us out in any way you can. And you can do that also by just word of mouth, just spreading the word, sharing our post, and interacting with us on social media. That's what we like. We like a fan interaction. We like discussing things with you. We like hearing the feedback. We like hearing your suggestions and ideas. Helps keep us motivated. It helps keep us growing. So continue to do that. You can find me on Twitter at the Dave Dynasty. I'm on there a lot. That's one of the best ways to interact with me. And you can also look me up on Facebook, as I said earlier. But make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, as I mentioned earlier, because we're always posting things up there besides new episodes of the podcast. There's always classic wrestling and so much more. Thank you for being with us this week. Thank you for listening and all your support and keeping the Midwest Express chugging. In the near future, we will be doing a cross-promotion Summit Alliance big-time episode with Andy from the Road Home from Wrestling podcast, who was on a couple episodes ago, and from Chad from chadsandIdiot.com. And we will be presenting for your pleasure the 2018 Midwest Pro Wrestling Awards and Review. We're going to give out some awards, which will be going up very soon for you guys to fan vote on. We've narrowed down the nominees in each category, and we're going to put those out there for you to vote on. And we will do a special episode where the three of us will come together, announce those winners, talk about the results, and there will probably be a few interviews in there with some of the winners also. At least I'm hoping so. So make sure you watch for that towards the end of the year. And continue to support us. Continue to share, spread the word, interact with us. And until next week, this is the Dave Dynasty Show. I am Dave Dynasty. Be good, be safe, and keep on growing.